Welcome to Chasing Sustainability, a set of episodes that reflect on the challenges related to developing sustainable practices in the rural environment. If you're one of those people interested in learning about international development in remote areas and global sustainability, join me in this adventure, where you will come across some truly fascinating projects and learn about local traditions while you discover some natural hidden gems on the way. So, let's get started. We are not makers of history. We are made by history. Yes, I know we were going to talk about sustainability, but I realized that a good way to begin was by presenting the fascinating historical context of this beautiful country, Indonesia. I'm not an expert, but up to this point I've been reading some truly engaging books about the recent history of Indonesia, and I've also collected the stories of some people who experienced firsthand the process of decolonization of Indonesia during the past century. So, for the sake of drawing the full picture of the situation in Sumba, and since the past shapes the present, I felt compelled to give you a little taste of the recent history of Indonesia before starting with the real specific projects that we are going to see in the next episodes. To do so, I will go back a few centuries to the 17th century when the Dutch presence began. What was known thereafter as Indonesia was at that time the Dutch Indies. These territories were occupied by the Dutch from the 17th century to 1942. Although some other territories were also occupied by the British and the Portuguese. In 1602, the Dutch established the Dutch East India Company, VOC, which curiously, it was the first multinational in the world used for trading, and became the dominant European power by 1610. Centuries after, these territories were influenced by the Americans, the Chinese and Europeans, and finally by the Rising Sun Empire, the Japanese, from 1942 to 1945. The latter was one of the tipping dates in the recent history of Indonesia because the revolution, or the so-called revolusi, took place. It was the first country to proclaim its independence in the aftermath of World War II. Therefore, in history, Indonesia is considered to be the first domino to fall when large parts of Asia, Africa and the Arab world were in hands of few Western European states. However, as we know now, the colonization period has influenced the culture of local societies in some ways and has implied the adoption of Western models and structures, as we will see later on during this documentary. As worldwide known, Indonesia is a country rich in natural resources, and this attracted the interest of the mentioned colonizers. Some examples of such resources are the coveted exotic spices of the Maluku region, for example, and the multiple petroleum extraction spots all over the country. And as you can imagine, in the fossil fuel era, coal and petroleum were seen as the black gold resources. And let's see why.
Energy.
Scientists define energy as the ability to do work. It's everywhere around us and takes all sorts of forms, including heat, light, motion, electrical form, chemical, gravitational forms, and so on. And as you probably know, according to the first law of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy, energy cannot be either created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. There are also many different sources of energy, which can be divided into two main groups, the renewable energy group and the non-renewable energy group. Renewable energy forms can be replenished over time, can be regenerated, while on the other hand, the non-renewable energy forms cannot. And this is added to pollution issues related to petroleum, oil and gas. Energy is everywhere in our lives, for example in transportation system, lighting, cooking and so on. Since the Industrial Revolution, huge public and private companies, often monopolies, have been created surrounding the energy value chain. And to put it in a few words, the evolution of the energy system has always been context dependent. So where are we right now exactly? Well, as previously mentioned, it seems like we're walking towards the sustainable development era where the 17th SDGs are guiding international decisions, right? However, as discussed in the last COP26 in Glasgow, the pace of actions has been remarkably low, and we are entering the so-called critical decade. We observe a global pattern that shows how more densified and populated areas are strategically located around trading harbors where big cities were developed in the past. For example, Batavia, also known as Jakarta nowadays. This was a clear colonialism heritage which created imbalances between urban and rural areas. For example, easier access to education, to energy, to good sanitation systems, work opportunities, and so on. Such differences were accentuated and shaped by power interests and profit-driven energy incumbents, whose aim was to be mainly profitable instead of bringing universal access to the population. However, at this point in history, Indonesia seems to have fair and reasonable purposes to achieve effectively universal energy access, and many of the proposed solutions on the table include the increasing use of renewable energy. The reason why they emerge as a key factor to achieve sustainable future is because of their multiple advantages. For example, they have wide availability over time, they are environmentally friendly, which means that they cause a tiny amount of GHG emissions, although they still cause GHG emissions. They contribute to have a cleaner atmosphere, they require fewer maintenance costs, they can increase countries' economic independence, and also they can reduce inequalities between urban and rural areas, which is a very important point here. However, after mentioning some of the pros, it's also necessary to talk about the shortcomings of renewable energy. First, it's not available around the clock due to its intermittency, therefore they normally require batteries or any other energy storage system. Although their efficiency is getting higher over the years, it's still lower than non-renewable energy sources. And finally, the initial cost for implementing renewable energy projects is usually higher than for non-renewable. Despite such limitations, world leaders acknowledge that we need to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energies, mainly to avoid the destruction of the environment and the destruction of our planet Earth in general. Therefore, many renewable energy projects are taking place nowadays. So up to this point, I've already introduced you a little taste of the recent history of Indonesia and the importance of developing renewable energy projects and sustainable practices, specifically in rural communities. Now it's time for us to get down to work and dive deeper into specific projects to analyze their particular challenges closely. That's why I would like to introduce to you a project that is completely aligned with all the information presented up to now, and it's the so-called Sumba Iconic Island that I will explain in the next episode, so stay tuned.